Ambassador Burns, you've talked a lot about the sanctions bill we passed here in the Senate. If Speaker Ryan in the House of Representatives doesn't take up that Russian sanctions bill, what kind of message do you think that would send to Vladimir Putin?
I think a message of weakness, because the Senate, by a huge margin, has teed this up. It's the right thing to do to have a painful type of leverage against the Russians. And if it's diluted in the House, and if the Trump administration encourages the House to do that, which is what one hears, then I think the Russians are going to receive a mixed message here, not a stiff message, which they need to receive.
Do you think it will send them, make him more or less likely to interfere in the 2018 and 2020 elections?
You know, I read the transcript of your hearing with Director Comey. He told you that he thinks it's going to continue. Yeah. Until we have better defenses, until we've gone on the offense. I think that President Trump should consider, maybe Secretary Tillerson should do this, exactly what President Obama did, go to Putin directly, as President Obama did. It was after our election, as Senator Collins pointed out, and just say there are going to be consequences and spell them out. That's actually probably the most effective thing that the Trump administration should do.
Should we take these kinds of cyber attacks and election manipulation as seriously as we would take a military action or an economic threat to our country?
Well, as you know, they're different. Obviously, a military action is immediate, consequential. You have to respond within hours. I actually think this is what they've tried to do systematically to the Dutch, the Montenegrins, the French, the Germans, and the Americans is discredit democracy in the eyes of our citizens. Right. I use the word existential in my testimony. I don't think it was hyperbole. I think it was the right word to use. So I think we need to meet this squarely. And all of us have suggested a multitude of ways that we can do that.
I don't disagree. I think one of the challenges, as you've mentioned, is that the current president has been unwilling to respond or even acknowledge the validity of the Russian hostile actions in the election. I'm curious what that means for what we as members of the Senate can or should do to advance a conversation with our European allies about sanctions, and I would certainly like your opinion on that, but I would open it to the other members on the panel as well.
That conversation has to be held. Normally in this situation, as you know, the State Department and White House would be talking to the Germans, the Austrians about the consequences of the Senate bill. I don't know if this happened this time, but we're in this phase. We've talked about the separation of powers for 200 years, where it's my own view that Congress needs to play the leading role because I perceive Congress to be tougher against Russia.
Abhors a vacuum. Do any of you want to add to that? Dr. Stelzenmueller?
Of course. It's well known that German politicians, senior German politicians, the Chancellor and the Foreign Minister have protested the sanctions bill. And this is, of course, because German companies, and not just German companies, other Europeans as well, are invested in Nord Stream 2. I'm not a big fan of this project, frankly. But I'm far more concerned about unilateral American sanctions that aren't discussed with the Europeans, that are just put out there and we have to deal with them. The fact of the matter is that we had actually for years been asking America to allow the export of American LNG to the European market, and that it had been Congress that was resisting this. So I think the lesson of this experience is for us to, as allies, discuss what is in the interest of the alliance and where we can work together. And I think that would, again, be of significant importance as a deterrent towards Russia.
While I have you, Doctor, when President Trump questioned the value, the relevance of NATO, whether we should even keep it as a structure, who do you think benefited most from that?
Well, I've already said that. I think that helps the Kremlin, and it's not great. I also don't think it's in America's self-interest to question that alliance, because you have significant interest in Europe and in Europe's periphery, and the alliance with us Europeans helps you pursue those national self-interests.
I could not agree more. Mr. Sarp, before my time runs out, you talked a little about how we should try to take the truth directly to the Russian people because of the filter that they receive so much of their information through. How can we cut out Vladimir Putin and speak directly to the Russian people?
Well, I think it is very clear and evident that is the same new environment, which is the digital one. And if one takes note of the recent protests in Russia against the corruption, it was very strikingly how young the crowd was. And it was also very clear that these people don't anymore get their worldview from the TV. It's all about also social networks. And yeah, that's the way you can get the truth back to them. I'm sure Kremlin will try to put up a new elements to block us, but I think that is an environment where we can get back to them.
I want to thank you all for your testimony today.
Senator Blunt.